Jerry Kearns. I'm from District 83, which is the most of Lee County, and actually my town of residence is Kilcock. And I'm here with some folks from the Senate and the House to talk about some issues, and mine is the minimum wage. I believe the minimum wage increase would be a win-win situation for Iowa employers and employees. Some facts I'd just like to leave with you. How much the federal minimum wage would be if we kept up with inflation over the past 40 years would be $10.74. Instead, it's $7.25. That doesn't make sense for people trying to make a living at that rate. One of the things I'd like to say is that you can't build 21st century economy by encouraging businesses to pay 19th century wages. We need to keep up with the times, we need to keep up with the rates for these folks, and we need to build our communities based upon good wages, good jobs, and to do that, you need to raise the minimum wage. Oftentimes we talk about the minimum wage being good for employees, and it is, and it would be. Families would gain from that, they have a better standard of living, but it's also good for the community. It's also good for the economy. It's good to businesses, to have businesses in your community have more in the way of business. Almost all the income that minimum wage workers earn are spent in the community. If it's increased to whatever the wage rate may be, 10.10 on the federal level, we're looking at that here as well in Iowa, that would be that much more of an economic boost in our state. So I think we should do it. I think it would be a great thing to do, and I turn it over to Senator Dotzler.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm Senator Bill Dotzler from Senate District 61. That represents Black Hawk County. And I serve as the chair of the Economic Budget Subcommittee. And I work closely with businesses all the time. In fact, in my 18 years in the legislature, that's really been one of my focuses, Iowa businesses and Iowa workers. You know, I've never thought for a minute that helping Iowa businesses hurts Iowa workers. And I'm going to say that again. I never thought that by helping Iowa businesses, we hurt workers. In fact, I think the opposite happens. When Iowa businesses are profitable and they succeed, there are better opportunities for those workers who work for those companies, who become more profitable because of the help that we give them on the state level. But also, you know, workers and responsible Iowa businesses can gain together when those workers are being treated in a fair way. So businesses shouldn't necessarily hurt those workers, but we need to make sure that they are treated fairly. And I think that we can come out both as winners, those businesses and Iowa workers, when we work together, we make sure that they're taken care of both properly. And what I'm talking about really is about commercial contractors and businesses who fail to pay subcontractors, and those businesses who fail to pay Iowa workers what is owed to them. We've had a couple of bills in the Iowa Senate, the prompt pay legislation, which I think is Senate File 2155, where subcontractors can go after what they're owed plus interest when commercial contractors refuse to pay on time. And this is becoming a more serious issue in the state of Iowa every year. And then also small businesses and their employers have the same right to be paid as big businesses from which they contract from. And in Iowa, we're seeing where the major contractors are withholding these payments for work that's due, and that's not right. Also, our wage theft legislation. And I think that this really is a bill that targets Iowa businesses who operate on the shady side of things and which compete unfairly, and I mean seriously, compete unfairly with good Iowa employers who pay their workers properly. And these shady Iowa businesses cheat workers by shorting their paychecks, confiscating tips, misclassifying their workers, and taking unauthorized paycheck deductions and refusing to pay people overtime that's due. It's becoming a greater problem in the state of Iowa every year, and we hope that the House will pass this legislation to help protect Iowa's workers. Do we have any questions on these two issues that Jerry and I might be able to answer?
Is there any way that you can get any kind of interest by the Republicans in this?
Well, I saw a comment from Representative Forstall that said that he's having a difficult time sleeping at night, worrying about Iowa workers not being paid. And I think, you know, I agree with him on that. It is very troublesome. And I think that, you know, in talking with Representative Forstall, he's in our Budget Appropriations Committee, I think that we can find ways to try to move this forward. I know it's been suggested that maybe we need a study committee, and I think we need action right now, but this problem, I'm more than willing to sit down with the business and industry community and talk about this farther and help them understand what a real problem that is when good businesses, those businesses that are being represented by organizations like the business and industry organizations in this state, ABI to name one, and that almost all of those individuals are doing the right thing. But there are companies out there that use cheating people out of wages as a business model to be able to have a competitive edge, and that's wrong. They should not be able to compete unfairly with Iowa's good businesses and contractors.
As a co-chair of the Economic Development Budget Subcommittee, have these joint targets made your work any easier, or what's going to transpire from this point on with that?
Well, I know the governor had an aggressive agenda in our budget, and because of the House and Senate's work, we obviously don't have the resources to do all that. But we're going to look at specific target areas, and we think worker training is one of the most important things that we really need to address in Iowa. With the Iowa Business Council and others, the Economic Development Authority surveying Iowa businesses, they're saying that there's over 7,000 jobs sitting open in Iowa right now. And you got to ask yourself, if the governor knew that he would have a company come to Iowa that would create 7,000 jobs overnight, what kind of resources would he offer up? And so we're thinking that we need more resources to help with worker training, apprenticeship programs, the kind of things that help companies train their existing workers to upskill them for the new technologies that we face in the 21st century. Okay.
Right. I wanted to talk about a couple of things that the Senate has sent over to us. We've been working on issues like drones and snowmobiles in the House of Representatives. The Senate, on the other hand, has taken a serious look and expressed concerns about Iowa's children and working families in our state. So there have been a couple of bills that have come over from the Senate that have not been acted on the House, and I want to point those out. The first one deals with the child care credit. We know that more and more Iowa families are two-family income families, and that there is more and more of a need for child care. So the Senate sent over the Smarter Child Care Assistance Program that will help with families in paying for child care by providing tax credits and a movement up of that tax credit. I call on the Iowa House leadership to bring forth that bill and give that kind of relief to Iowa's families. The second bill, a few minutes ago, I made a point of inquiry to Speaker Polson regarding the bill, Senate File 2322, that was passed out of the House, or out of the Senate, and sent over to the House on February 27th. This bill is the only bill that is alive that addresses delinquent girls in our state, some of the children who most need intervention and most need state services made available to them. It was passed over to the House of Representatives, and it is yet to be assigned to a committee. That was the inquiry I made to Speaker Polson this morning, and he said that he would check into it. The clock is ticking around here. We are moving very rapidly towards adjournment. We need to resolve this issue. We need to take up that bill. And so I called on Speaker Polson today to bring up that bill.
Any questions on that?
Have you gotten any response from him? He said he talked to you.
He said that he would review, or he would check into it, I believe were his words about this bill.
And then finally, of course, I think all of you know that we're about 6 weeks ahead of where we were last year in terms of coming up with joint targets between the two chambers. And that certainly puts us on a pathway where our subcommittees can now work on setting their priorities and approving the various budgets that we have to do by law as a state legislature. So we are ahead of the game a little bit than we have been in previous years. Those targets are now out. And I know our budget subcommittees are meeting as we speak to start figuring out what of the priorities are and how they're going to fund those priorities in this legislative session. So with that, is there any more questions?
I have a question.
I have a question about the budget. I know that you have at least 3 sort of big ticket items that I'm pretty sure the Republicans are not keen on. Expanding preschool, the juvenile home, and the child independent tax credit. So what are the Democrats going to have to stiff in order to get those paid and still be under the target?
What were the 3 again?
Preschool,
Preschool,
universal preschool.
juvenile home,
Mm-hmm.
and the child independent tax credit, increasing the child.
I think the juvenile home, we can find the resources inside the
The current
human,
budget.
human services budget. Based on, I mean, it was in last year's budget to operate that facility. The human services budget has an increase implicit in it. In what we, in their part, it's got an increase over last year's level. And so we think they're able to do that inside the budget target they've got.
But they want
On the tax credits, all of those things are subject to some discussion and some negotiation. One of the ways to deal with it, if it has an impact on this year's budget, is to have it start in the next fiscal year. So on the tax pieces, those are relatively easy to adjust.
And preschool?
Same thing on preschool. It's relatively easy to put that into a budget year where it doesn't impact this year's budget, just as we're supposed to do on
K-12
allowed
funding.
growth. We're supposed to be doing that for 2015, pardon me, for 2016 right now. So those are items that we can have discussions back and forth with the House Republicans on setting those up so that they happen in a fiscal year that doesn't directly impact the budget we're about to set.
But that isn't, for the juvenile home, that doesn't take into account any kind of brick and mortar work that's going to have to be done.
Brick and mortar would, generally speaking, come out of the
Infrastructure budget,
which is not general fund or ongoing spending.
You two represent cities which are hoping to have the legislature have a funeral for greyhound racing. There is not a bill in the Senate to do that. What sort of behind the scenes insight can you provide regarding your discussions with the House where there is a bill?
It's a rough issue.
We're still working on it.
Why is it?
Let me say it again. It's a rough issue.
They didn't
I got
quite
it.
catch that, yes. Now they did.
But I mean, is that,
We are still working on
I
that
would say everybody involved in this has encouraged both sides to work on a negotiated settlement that provides what some have referred to as a soft landing for people that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in operations to raise dogs, some sort of soft landing for those folks, some sort of soft landing or guarantee for people that would lose jobs under that scenario. And I think there are good faith discussions going on that. And I think, I'll just speak for myself. I have strongly encouraged both sides in that discussion to try and work through that and come to an agreement. That would be the best outcome. It usually is around here when we have interests on two sides of an issue to kind of encourage them to go together and negotiate those issues rather than us. And when we do it all by ourselves, sometimes it's a bit arbitrary and capricious. I think it really behooves both sides of that debate to cooperate with each other, look for a way to negotiate a settlement, and get this issue behind us.
The only thing I'm going to say is they
encourage them to do that.
they are still talking, they are still discussing.
What about the concept of a racino?
The concept of racino, that was a new twist to what had previously been in any discussions. It's a little harder lift, I will say that. Some people view that as an expansion of gambling. And so it is certainly entered into the mix, but it is still part of the ongoing discussions between all of the parties.
I have a question. Yesterday, there were two committees had extensive discussions about medical marijuana, and there's some very emotional testimony from people who have family members or were personally affected by the medical marijuana issue, and they made very emotional appeals by it, and a lot of time was spent by your own committee discussing it. Is there any possibility that you are going to go ahead and pass this, just as you have on these wage issues, some of these other issues, just because you think that that's the right thing to do?
I think people are still, the people inside the legislature are still being educated on this issue. I think it's pretty clear that there are some diseases, seizure disorders, epilepsy, people going through chemo. There are some diseases where clearly medical marijuana is part of an appropriate treatment. And I think there's a lot of people in the legislature that understand that. I think there are still a great number that have significant resistance to doing anything on that front. I think what I'd make clear is that if the legislature goes down this path, we're going to do it in a way that is highly limited, highly restricted. It's not going to be medical marijuana for any purpose. It's going to be pretty severely restricted to those kinds of things where there's a clear pharmacological indication that this is a treatment, that this is an appropriate and good treatment for those challenges. So, and my heart goes out to those families. I guess we'll see if there's a consensus that can develop around that. At the moment, it seems like a long shot.
Is that where this gets so difficult, figuring out how to narrowly tailor
It's
it?
not.
No. I think New Mexico is a pretty good model for a way to really restrict it, so that it's not just a matter of a little bit of pain relief or whatever. It's really where you put in charge some people that say we're going to limit this to diagnoses where there is a clear, solid medical indication that this is in fact the treatment of choice. And so I think you can do that. I don't think those details are the problem.
The Board of Pharmacy has already looked at that issue as well. And they provide a very narrow list of illnesses that it would be used for in this state. And that's been around for several years now. So the Board of Pharmacy has even said that it's something the state should be looking at legalizing for specific illnesses.
So are you both on board with this, to do this? Or not? It seems like you have more questions.
It seems like I have more questions.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think the medical evidence is actually pretty solid. My job as majority leader is to figure out what bills have the ability to get passed and become law, and that's the challenge to this issue.
Do you have a projection as to how long it might take the legislature to get educated? How many years?
Well, I would say, I think I would just refrain from saying, for those that haven't, I think it's a good thing that the committees met. They brought in people to help folks understand. I'm not sure the right people were in the room for that discussion, but it at least paves the way for additional discussions so that folks that weren't in the room may eventually hear about this. I know people have shown up in my community at community forums and have talked about this issue. I think that this building is what happens out there across the state of Iowa, in individual representative and senator districts across the state.
What issue would you compare this to that is the same issue that has taken sort of the same path to eventual legislative approval?
I don't know. I've only been around a short while here.
Any other questions?
I know we've all been saluting the bipartisanship that went into the joint budget targets. I'm wondering if there hasn't been some transparency lost in the process. With, leaders getting together and...
Nobody gave you a copy of the targets that we came out with?
Yeah, but how did you get there?
The same way we got there last year, the year before.
Wasn't it more
And the year
out
before
in-
that.
But wasn't it more out in the open when we didn't come together and say, this is our target, the two parties, this is our target?
If you'd like, we could issue different targets at this point, but
I knew you were gonna say that.
But we felt that it behooved us in divided government to look for ways. This obviously isn't the budget we would pass left to our own devices. I hope you all understand that. We think there are things that are left out in this budget. We think there are people that are left behind. That none of us would describe this as a perfect budget. But we still think it behooves us to work together, find where our common ground is. I would say that we respected, didn't necessarily agree with, but respected some of the caveats that the House put on the table in this discussion. We respected those in terms of developing our responses back and forth on these targets, and they respected some of the things that we said were crucial, and we came up with joint targets. Like it's not that I think they'd say this isn't our ideal budget. We'd say it isn't our ideal budget either, but it's what's possible in divided government.
What's the driving force behind it? I mean, I understand that it might have been an agreement prior to the session even that you were talking about maybe trying to do that this session. What was the driving force behind it from the onset? Did you just want to get out of here earlier? Did you really feel like it was better for everyone involved?
It's always tough from my perspective. I always thought this is a very interesting job. We spend months campaigning, focusing on where we disagree with the other party. We have a strong two-party system in this country. We spend months defining our differences, and then at 9 o'clock on Tuesday of Election Day, we're supposed to instantly shift from what we disagree on to what we agree on. And that's obviously a little easier if you have all three entities in the process of the same party. So it's obviously more difficult when the voters choose to give us a mixed team. But I still have always believed it behooves us to figure out a way to work together and find common ground. And as I've said before, I think the federal government gave us some impetus by their bad example, some impetus after the 2012 election to work better together. We did that last year and got a lot of things accomplished. We came into this session kind of going, so do we really have to go through this stage where we stake out our differences with budget targets, which, if you think about it, is really about campaigns and where we disagree. We got plenty of time for that. The voters will be tired of our campaigns. We got plenty of time to do that. So we said, how about we try a process where instead of starting out with what we disagree on, we go right to where can we agree. So that's what we decided to do. That's what the targets of yesterday were. As you know, we maybe thought we were going to get them done a little quicker than we did. We maybe thought we could get them done last week or even late the week before. So it's not that there aren't still significant differences, but this is what we can agree on, and that's what our members are working on.
Briefly, is there potential then on the juvenile home issue in the infrastructure budget? Is there potential there for delaying? Are you really going to butt heads on that and delay the ending session?
We're going to continue to have discussions. We think that there are 45, we think there are 45 kids, young girls, that were in that facility that really, I would guess at least half of them were not really put in ideal places. They dumped the kids, a bunch of them went back to their families. One of the complaints about the facility is they weren't getting education. A bunch of them have been just dumped in juvenile detention where they're not getting education. Well, actually, we have an expert here. We can
Well,
listen to him.
I just want, Joyce, you've asked a couple of questions about infrastructure, and I want to make sure everyone is aware that significant taxpayer dollars have already been put into a facility for infrastructure over the last several years, and in fact, some of the work continued after closing. So we very much think that there needs to be a continued commitment to infrastructure that we've been already keeping up.
And one more question?
Let's go back to the dogs. Have you set a drop dead date for them to come up to an agreement? Because unless you do, they're just gonna continue negotiating forever, on one side.
Listen, in the strongest possible ways, I have said to both sides of this discussion, it behooves you to find a resolution this year.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Mark?